当时有个机会，美国普林斯顿大学，因为我老去表演嘛，普林斯顿大学给我一个条件，就是说你来到我这儿上学。
你看，我还问对了。
对，你来到我这儿上学，我给你奖学金，但是你要免费教大学里的人练武术。
这是蛮好的一个选择。
很好。但是这面的电影公司说你回来吧，拍电影。
对。
这两个选择。
对。
那我还是说啊，去拍个电影吧。拍完电影不成了，我再去上学，是吧？就这么一个选择。
Hey guys, fight commentary breakdowns here. Some of you know this, but I'm taking a class on taxes, so if I look a little tired, that's why. But anyways, let's have some fun with this Jet Li interview. Now, Jet Li could have gone to Princeton, man. Not only would he be a fellow Ivy Leaguer like me, but even more importantly, I think if he went to Princeton, took that road, he would have been a lot like Bruce Lee. He would have had American education, and he would have really gotten environment to philosophize and potentially even get inspired to train other arts beyond Kung Fu. In one of my past translations, I said if Jet Li had his circumstances different, he could have been even more Bruce Lee than Bruce Lee was. That Princeton gig, if he took it, he would have been like a Bruce Lee or Bruce Lee. Life had other plans for him. Let's keep going.
这个不是最痛苦，最痛苦是说，少林寺拍了电影了，电影还不错啊，在那个年代是相当不错。那我就从此以后应当正常的逻辑是，我应当就继续拍电影了，对吧？
对。
而且那个年代的诱惑。基本上拍完一部电影，人家给我拿了一张600万的支票。
少林寺啊！
拍完之后，
你都吓死了吧？
没吓死，我就觉得开心死了。但是2部，他说你帮我拍2部电影，我给你每一部300万。
That's a lot of money, man. Adjusted for inflation, right? Now, obviously, RMB, 人民币. By the way, Chinese lesson, 人民币 means the people's money or the people's currency. So now you guys learned another Chinese term, but that's the official currency of China. At that time, man, 3 million per film. That's a lot of money. That would set him for life. Let's look at what happens. How does it sort of go downhill from here?
我还没听到这个痛苦是怎么个痛苦，
是吧？这个痛苦
啊，对，不知道啊。
你是属于单位的，回来别不能做，回来继续练武术去比赛去。这你自己没有选择权。
打破铁饭碗这个。
你不能选择，你要自己回来。
啊。
你要回来以后继续做你的运动员，继续每年去比赛。那你说我就要继续拍电影不行，回来比赛。那你要面对的比赛就是未来10年还是那重复着自己已经很熟悉的8年的工作，再做8年，很无谓的浪费的生命。
That just sucks, man. I can't even imagine. You can't show people something better and expect them not to take it. We know Jet Li's a thankful guy. It is a risk, right? Because what if your person is not thankful and doesn't give you all the shout outs? But man, can you imagine if they let Jet leave willingly and knowing he's a very thankful person, how much he could have funneled money? Maybe they could have just told him 10%, give us 10% of your earnings. Imagine how big the Kung Fu community could have grown. What people don't realize about what certain events communist China went through did for China was that it further eroded this social trust that we take for granted that at least used to be a defining feature of the West. I don't know how much it is now. For the longest time, whenever people from communist countries would come to America, they would say something like, wow, people are really warm. Strangers are really helpful. Now, the cynical part of us would say it's only because these people hadn't seen the bad areas of America. If you're comparing people of the same social economic class, on average, a person in the West is just a little bit more trusting, a little bit more warm. I'm saying all this because the concept of win-win, I talked about it with Xu Xiaodong when I interviewed him, but the concept of win-win is just not something that's a Chinese concept. Countries that have experienced times of extreme scarcity, people just don't really think win-win. They think the pie's limited and there's no way to make the pie bigger. And of course, you know, the days of influencer marketing, right? If this were now, imagine if Jet Li just on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and stuff with his level of talent when he was 18 was shouting out his schools, his people, his products. Man, Jet Li would have been like the greatest influencer ever. I mean, he was a really good looking dude when he was young too. Man, Jet Li would have been like the Timothy Chalamet.
不去了吗？不干了。
不去，那你这无组织无纪律，几乎就把你的生毁了。不去了，不可能的，不可能。那个年代是不可能。
对，而且你去香港，你出都出不去。
出不去的
啊，你的身份都不行。那咋办了？
我这个好像这么 几十年我都没讲这事儿。
I think those of you who've never grown up in collectivist cultures just don't understand this point. Why can't you just say no? I welcome, please, all my viewers who've grown up in collectivist cultures chime in, explain the psychology. The best thing I could say is people who have worked in tech, you've probably experienced something similar. Why are you working past 11? Why are you working on a Saturday? Anyone that's worked at a startup, anyone that's worked in tech. Now imagine those feelings, that peer pressure, but not just peer pressure, but hierarchical type of authority pressure times 100. That's what it's like for Jet Li. And beyond that, I am sure it had been put in Jet Li's head that, look, you got special treatment, you owe us, right? That's the key. There's a level of feeling like you owe the system. It's hard to explain this if you haven't experienced this. I want my viewers who've grown up in collectivist countries or my viewers who've had parents or grandparents who grew up in collectivist countries, elaborate on this in the comment section.
其实我嫁了，当时我在想，我唯一可能离开职业运动员生涯，就是把自己腿摔断了，这是自己受伤，自己只有受了伤，才不能再做运动员，对吧？这是不是一个基本的逻辑？
I have to make it very clear right here. He's not thinking of actual self HARM, okay? He's talking in hypotheticals. Basically, this is his way of saying how burned out he was, how oppressive it was at the time, how collectivist it was at the time. He literally couldn't follow his dreams. He couldn't get out of something he wasn't enjoying to the point where his head was going in that direction. Of course, he's not going to do it. I just want to make that clear. Please keep watching this. And please hold off your judgment until you hear what he has to say next.
所有的领导，所有的人才不能再说我什么。只要我没有受伤，我仍然是一个职业运动员，是肯定没办法的事儿。
这自残不是容易一件事情。
我只是想，
OK，
我只是有那个脑海中想这事儿，我只是想这事儿，我没有说拿个东西把腿砸断了，那么冲动，那么傻，我只是想这事儿。这是逻辑上是只有这样才能离开运动队，只是这样离开我的生涯我才能转行。就这样，我想了3天。
See, even the host probably thought what some of you guys were thinking. And that's okay, especially in the 80s. Psychology, therapy, all that stuff, that was definitely not in China. It was you tough it out. Nowadays, if an athlete got burned out, maybe they would go to some counselor. The team or whatever organization sponsoring the athlete would have all those mental health resources. But at the time, there was nothing, right? China had just come out of really, really craziness. The mentality now, and my parents' and grandparents' generation still have this mentality. It's like, dude, we couldn't even eat one meal when we were young every day. Why are you unhappy or burned out or whatever? In his mind, he knows that he has something amazing, which is he can be a wushu pro for the rest of his life. But he's a guy with dreams. We know this. If you guys haven't seen the interviews from before, we know he's not just a thinker, but he's an entrepreneurial type of guy. So of course he's not the type who would just accept, okay, I'm stuck, right? If you feel stuck, not everyone, and that's fine. But some people really need to get unstuck, and he's one of those.
我星期一回去训练，做差不多了，都下课了。我那个老师说：“哎，你这样行吗？你拍电影都把功夫废了，你再练。”我就很不情愿的再回去，做了一个动作，在空中做了个动作，一下来我就听见啪啦啪啦啪啦3声，我就躺在地上，我说：“哦，我腿断了。”
那是老天帮你了。
我不知道，我不是我自己自残的，真的不是我自残的，我没那么蠢。想是归想，但是我没办法搬自己的腿，是吧？那多痛啊！
心想事成。
我不知道，那对，有点是非常倒霉的一件事情。而且我之前想这3天的时候，这个16、19岁的孩子吧，我想这个的时候，我还想着说，我受伤的话，我要去哪家医院？我要去哪家医院？什么我都想过。对，发生了。发生了以后，我们学校就急促的把我送到积水滩医院，
对，
就照 X 光什么的，说没什么事儿，
啊，
就把我送回来了。我说不行，我要去那个医院，北医3院，就运动医学院北医3院。他没办法，就下午再送我去北医3院。
为什么要去那个医院呢？
因为那个是运动创伤医院，而且那个医院是做腿做的全中国最棒的。
还可以出个证明。
没有去了，一进去那医生一看。一掰了这个腿，内侧韧带断了，十字韧带断了，半月板断了，马上手术室。
哟， 那要是在积水潭就误了。
原来积水潭是骨科，骨科照 X 光是骨头，不是那个筋呢，那个韧带是筋的软的那些部分，照 X 光是看不到那些筋的位置。
So much to say about this section, but obviously if your body just goes palooka when you are training extra hard, your body's probably worn out. That's a subtext that I just realized as I was watching this again. Jet Li was one of the most talented wushu artists, and then he just made a movie. They're making him train really hard again. I mean, back then, China wasn't too familiar with movies, so they didn't do movies the way that they would do in Hong Kong or other places. They were sort of hitting each other pretty hard in the action scenes. This is something I might translate later. Jet Li talks about this later. Jet Li's body was being extremely abused to make that first movie, Shaolin Si, Shaolin Temple. So it's not like he slacked like that teacher implied, and that's why the teacher made him train more, even though he was already burned out mentally and his body was worn out. That's probably what happened, why his body he landed wrong or something, and normally it would have just been a sprain, but it just went. The second part I have to talk about is, man, you gotta be careful with these doctors. You got to be careful who you see. You got to see the right specialists, right? I got to give a shout out to Nicholas Davis. So I had a little bit of a knee injury that just wouldn't recover correctly, and Nick helped me with PT. But it was one of those where I went to get an x-ray. It's like there's nothing wrong with the bones. And when you get an x-ray on your knee, I think you can see a little bit of one of the ligaments or something. Like, oh, so there's nothing too wrong, but why does this still hurt? And it's one of those where when I hurt my knee, I probably should have gotten an MRI. Now, thank goodness it's healed. It drives me crazy that the medical world, there's this lack of communication between specialists and generals. There's a disconnect in general. I guess this is why the sports medicine community is such an emerging field, because sports medicine is interdisciplinary, right? And athletes do need people who are specialists at multiple areas to be able to synthesize and diagnose correctly. And man, thank goodness Jet, in his sort of wandering mind, overthinking philosophical mind, had a plan, and then the thing happened. It's crazy.
终于松了一口气，完了以后做了7个小时手术，完了就出来了，我就觉得好像是一种释放和一种解脱，我可以人生转折了，对吧？
Most people, when they have that level of injury where it needs 7 hours of surgery, they're sad, right? They're really, really stressed out. Jet's the only person I know who saw it from a positive view. Oh my goodness, I can finally not do the thing that I would have been forced to do for 10 more years when I had something better. On one hand, he is an optimist, but on the other hand, you can see how the culture of collectivist cultures like China can really put people in a very precarious position. There's certain people in this world, the entrepreneur, the intellectual, their trajectory is just like this. And if you stop this, sometimes those people just, and it's not just collectivist cultures, it's any culture that I think doesn't let people reach their full potential. And I'm calling out the culture I'm in now. You guys let me know in the comment section how many of you feel like you're still yet to reach your full potential. And more importantly, how many of you feel like you're actively getting there? I don't think I'm going to reach my full potential until we get to Mars. So maybe that'll be when I'm 120. You have to constantly feel like you're getting there. You have to feel like constantly you're taking steps towards it. When a society, when people feel like they can't get there, that's when society's slowly coming apart. And that's all I'm going to say, because then this can become a political channel, and then we can talk about current events, and then that's not what this channel's about. It was a bad injury, needed surgery, and then he's like, oh man, I mean, this sucks. I'm laying in bed. I might not be able to walk for a while, but the one thing that is positive is that I don't have to do the thing that I no longer have fun in, and I feel like I'm stuck doing.
第二天醒过来，医生到我这儿说，手术非常成功，但是职业运动员肯定做不了了，可以给你一个3级残废证。一生就有一个补助，那也可能一生都不能做任何剧烈活动。那我还说能拍电影吗？不知道，走路和跑步都可能困难，看看吧。我就觉得 又失望了，过度了，过头了。
I did a translation on stuntmen, right? Jet Li talking about stuntmen. And I think this is another reason why Jet Li's always been very honest about using stuntmen. Because now that we've known that he's had that injury, it makes sense why he wants to protect what he can protect, right? And if there's stuntmen that can take the abuse that obviously one of his legs can't anymore, then use it. It's like sometimes it really takes injuries. Unfortunately, this is such a weird thing to say, but it takes injuries to not only keep you humble, but keep you honest. It's also so inspiring. This injury happened after Jet Li's first movie. So he's been carrying around this injury since after his first movie. So look what he's done since then. As you guys know, I have a very bad ankle injury and it's still taking a while to heal, but it's getting better slowly. When I saw this segment, I'm like, ugh, I feel for you because I have injured myself pretty bad. Not as bad as he did. Still, it's inspiring to see one of my idols get past such an injury and still make amazing things. I know I can do it too. So I'm partly doing this part of the translation to encourage myself too. You know that Bruce Lee, when he got his injury, right, he wrote the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. And sometimes injuries give your brain time to find other avenues to have an outlet because you can't be doing all these crazy moves that the brain has to put power to, so the brain can channel it into other things. Look what I'm doing, translating Chinese culture, Chinese martial arts. I might have never done this if I didn't have the injury. Obviously, that's a little bit of a cope, right? But there is some ounce of truth to that. But anyways, let's keep watching Jet.
只有一部少林寺，你可以看到一个真正的李连杰在最佳的状况上，其他的就是我一直拖着这条腿。完了以后，这个韧带断了，里的十字断了，这个半月板骨头拿掉了，就一直伴随着我一生。
So there was a segment later that I'm not going to translate where he talked about eventually he came to America. You know, things in America are a little bit more strict. So when he was doing the insurance and stuff, he had to go consult doctors again. And at that point, there still wasn't any way to fully get his leg back to, let's say, as close to normal functioning as possible. But again, this interview was done about 10 years ago. Sports medicine has evolved since then. So it'd be interesting to see if Jet Li has had any potential good news about this injury. So that's to be continued. We'll look to see if Jet has sought any sort of treatment, especially the past 10 years. I think stem cell therapy especially has evolved a lot. So maybe there's a way, I don't know. So that's something I will look into for you guys. And that also makes me wonder, you know how Jet Li had issues with his endocrine system, right? Could it have been related to this injury or some of the other injuries? He broke other parts of his body too. So a lot of these actors, especially these action actors, have put their bodies through a lot, right? Jackie Chan, Jet Li, etc. And whether they are people who are formidable in a real fight, they've dedicated to their craft of action cinema, and they've made amazing lifelong influence on us, both from a filmmaking, an artistic, a philosophical, and of course a martial arts angle.
那我们后来在那么多电影里面看到你身手矫健的那么多，
那你不知道我背后有多痛苦，我一直都是拿激烈的绷带绷住，绷得很紧很严的，就是要挣扎跟这条腿，从1981年到现在，大约什么32年。
Jet Li is probably the most reserved out of all the action stars. Maybe Tony Jaa's a little bit more reserved than Jet Li, but Jet Li's gone through a lot, man, and he's never flaunted this. I'm sure a lot of people would have just given him way more credit if they knew about this. I mean, look at how much credit I'm giving him. I knew he hurt himself a lot, but I didn't know he hurt himself this bad so early in his career. You know, it could just go with Jet Li's personality, or it could be some of the stuff he adopted later on, like he's a Buddhist. But either way, he's so low-key about these things. Like, this interview was the first time he told the public. Another thing to keep in mind, the honesty that we see in Jet, this was a special era in China, right? This was before she took over. China had about 10 years before she took over. People thought that things would get a little bit more free. These 10 years, you saw people slightly push the boundaries of what they can say. Like, Jet never criticized the party or anything, but he did sort of criticize the culture of the time, right? The fact that the only way I can get out of my current situation is if I get hurt. That's a pretty big indictment about how oppressive it was back then. It could have been just Jet Li really liked this interviewer and he felt like it was time, but it's also definitely the era, the 2010s, that time. China, a lot of people were very hopeful the direction China was going to go. The West was too, right? That was the time, if you remember, where Hollywood kept trying to film in China and put Chinese actors in their movies. I think we have to translate more of Jet Li's stuff. Life knowledge. We will continue. And any of you who like this series, please consider being a channel member, or shout out to the people. Sometimes you can just give a super thanks. That helps too. So if you don't want to be a channel member, you can just give a super thanks once. That's sort of like being a channel member, but like giving a super thanks, right? So you can do that. And of course, guys, interact in the comments. I've been seeing a lot of arguing in the comments, which is fine, guys, but try to like say something positive, someone you agree with. So don't just seek out the people to argue, but say something positive. Can you please do that? Remember the yin and the yang? Say something positive to someone you agree with, and then say something positive to someone you disagree with. I don't think you want to say something negative to someone you agree with, but say something negative to someone you disagree with. But be respectful, please. Okay, guys? My commentary breakdowns will be back, and I was a little under the weather this weekend, but we managed to get this out. We're going to do more. We're going to do more, man. When March comes around, guys, I hope to see this channel 100,000 more subscribers. What do you think, guys? Do you think we can get to 300,000 subscribers? I think so. All right, guys. Talk to you soon. I look forward to reading your comments. I can't guarantee I'm going to get to all of them, but I'll try my best, okay?
This is Coach Nicolas Sagnac, and I'm going to train right now, but you are watching Fight Commentary Breakdowns with Jerry Liu, one of my favorite YouTube channel. Enjoy.